Okay, hey everyone, welcome to The Field Between. I'm Ahmed.
I'm Yasmin.
And it's Memorial Day.
It is. We've got the day off.
We do have the day off, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't respect the troops at least a little bit, so...
No, Ahmed.
I have a little clip.
I'm probably going to cut this.
I have a little clip.
I'm going to cut it.
This is a fitting tribute.
Okay.
You don't even know what it is.
Okay.
Rest in peace to all the soldiers that died in the service. I died in her service.
Okay. I just... Yeah, anyway, so that was all. That was it. I feel like that was a good tribute.
This is something we have slightly different feelings on, I think.
What?
I'm very against the American military and its impact on the world.
Yeah.
But I feel like realistically, a lot of people who end up serving in the military, like I really feel for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's fair.
Yeah.
I think it's a different question of like, do we respect the troops? You know, it's like, is it, you know, we were listening to that case the other day, a podcast called 5-4 about Supreme Court cases. And they were talking about, I forget the name, O'Brien, United States versus O'Brien, about whether or not it was permissible to burn your draft cards back during the Vietnam War.
Right.
And it kind of became an issue of like a respectability of the troops thing, because it didn't really have any function on whether or not people registered or entered for the draft. It was just the Supreme Court saying, oh no, you're not allowed to burn these because it might damage the morale of the troops doing this kind of, you know, illegal war over in Vietnam. And so I just feel like if people just kind of fall in line unquestioningly, not saying this is what you're doing, right? But with like the whole you have to respect the troops thing, like it's part of what helps maintain like the state, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, the only like source of social mobility a lot of people in this country have is the military. And that's a huge structural problem.
That's awful.
Yeah. At the high school that I worked at, the military tabled, I think it was like 200 days out of the year, which is insane. Oh, is that actually? Yeah, I mean that's like almost every high school day.
Oh yeah, I mean I know. I went to a poor high school where like a lot of young men who were in ROTC, and then you know, they would join the military, sign up, and then like come back to school with kind of a new shiny Mustang,
right? Because
that's what they entice them with. They're like, we'll give you a signing bonus if you just kind of sign your life away, and it's incredibly pernicious, but also fuck the troops as like a singular entity. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. But yeah, what's up with us? We were in Asheville this last weekend. It's kind of nice to say goodbye to the mountains. I feel like we're on like a goodbye North Carolina tour.
We say goodbye to the mountain. We're going to more mountains.
But we're not going to be in Asheville for a bit, I'm guessing.
You know?
We might go back in the fall.
Yeah. There's still a couple things that I think we wanted to do. We didn't get to go on any hikes, unfortunately.
It was really rainy. Yeah, it was kind of a cozy, cute weekend, but it was super rainy. The drive back was rough, though.
Somehow where we stayed, we were in the mountains, and then we were looking for a hike that we could do, but they were all somehow an hour away.
Yeah, they were really far. And we already had done like a lot of driving there and had a lot of driving ahead of us back, so we were not feeling that. We had a lot of good food. That was awesome.
That's true, yeah.
A lot of good pastries.
Really good barbecue.
That was amazing.
That was awesome.
Yeah. But kind of just getting back on track today. Got the house sorted. Yeah.
That's it though. You defend soon?
Yes, I have to email my advisor today to prepare for my defense. I defend in a week, next Monday. And I have to plan my my graduation party. Right.
You want to have you want it to be mud themed.
I want it to be sensory themed.
Sensory themed.
Yeah, so people are going to sign up to represent one of the senses with an activity.
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
But when you were talking to me about it, one of the things that you said you wanted to have was
a mud bath.
Mud. And the way that you were going to do that is we have some potting soil.
Which we haven't used. So this would be nice to use it.
Right. But that sounds like a terrible idea. That's just...
There's been multiple times where we've been in muddy situations and you haven't gone in the mud with me, and so I haven't gone
that's
either.
That's how you get parasites. It's not like it's like a clay mud that they use in like spas.
I'm not looking for a spa
experience. It doesn't
experience.
have chemicals
I'm looking
in
to roll around and then shower after.
Yeah, you're looking to catch a parasite.
I mean,
yeah. So I think there is, I don't know if it's like a willful desire to like just misunderstand what it would take to create like a mud bath thing.
Yeah, it was one of many ideas, to be fair. I also want to have a shaving cream station where we play with shaving cream.
That would be good. Where are you going to put all this?
Goo around the apartment.
But where?
In various sections of the apartment.
We don't have
and outside.
We don't have a kiddie pool
two
or
tubs.
anything?
Those can each.
Tubs?
Yeah, like the weeds for the Caravan's dry stuff. Those can each hold stuff.
You're going to put
shaving cream
people inside of the
they can just touch it with their hands.
Plastic bins.
Leave the vision to me. Don't worry. It's going to be good. I'm excited.
Okay. Imagine you're going to someone's house for a party and you walk in and there's a container tub filled with shaving cream.
I'm going to text everyone ahead of time instructions and have them like create activities. So yeah, I've got a vision. Mostly, honestly, though, I just want to do something fun. I feel like if I didn't do anything, I'd be really bummed. I'm a little bummed that I didn't walk, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't finish in time, so it is what it is. Like, it was on me.
I thought even before you said you didn't want to.
I think that I guess. I know that I would have had to if I...
Yeah.
Like, I would have walked if I finished in time because my advisor and my mom would have been happy.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't have been really a choice. I mean, I don't want to enough to do it again in a full year after.
Yeah.
Because... also, we're getting married next year, and it's just like too much in a short time period. And like, it's gonna be weird to be a professor for a year and then come back. And that's not weird if other people do. I just don't personally feel compelled to do that. But I do want to do something to mark it, even if it's just like a nice dinner and like a small party with a few friends and taking some photos.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Because it's been a long road.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What are we talking about today?
We're mostly going to talk about this letter that's going around the internet. I do have one thing to talk about before that.
Oh, okay.
This is not really an item so much, just like a cool update, but Minnesota had a really historic legislative session. And it's cool to see like a really rare case of Democrats actually doing shit. They are in the majority there. And they passed legislation to kind of enshrine protecting abortion rights into the state constitution, which is really cool. They did a lot more funding for public schools, free meals for all students, a $1 billion housing bill to assist renters and first-time home buyers. I'm sure none of these things are perfect, but it was just exciting to see so much get pushed through in one legislative session when it feels like there's so much gridlock everywhere else, or where we live, like actively harmful bills going through.
Yeah.
And I don't remember their names, and I should have looked them up ahead of time, but there are a couple of kind of cool young progressive politicians in particular that have been spearheading a lot of that change, and yeah, so good to see. Yeah,
that's awesome. It'd be interesting to see over time the flow of people going to Minnesota or leaving other places.
If it means people like go there. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I had to be in the Midwest, I would definitely go to Minnesota. I'd go to Minneapolis specifically because I think that the Twin Cities are really cool, but partially for this reason, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, hats off to them. Rest of the United States kind of
glad to see some good happening.
Going through some shit right now.
Right. Yeah, well put.
Yeah.
But yeah, our main thing that we're going to chat about today is this open letter that came out that was called Navigating Difference, Clarifying Sexual and Gender Ethics in Islam. It came out May 23rd. So, you know, about 5 days ago. I can't do math. 6 days ago.
Yeah.
For more time of recording this. And it was a statement about the LGBTQ community and Islam that was signed by like about 50 people, right? 50 kind of Muslim leaders.
I mean, I think they've had several rounds of people having read it and then signing on to it.
Yeah.
So I didn't count, but I mean, I would say it's at least 100 people. Yeah.
Including some pretty big names. I don't think we're going to say any specific names because I have to think about
I will
my job. But
nothing. Yeah. So I think the how I saw it was Imam Omar Suleiman, who's at the Yaqeen Institute.
Yeah.
Put it on his Instagram, and I think that's fair to say.
Yep.
Because it's public, and he's a pretty public figure for American Muslims. So
that was particularly disappointing. Omar Suleiman has done a lot of really important immigration work. He's based out of Texas, and I was really sorry to see his name here.
Yep. So that's how I found out about it. I just saw it on Instagram on his on his stories or something like that. But we read it and we're going to go through it. I think just for me, it is kind of disappointing to see this, but also at the same time, when you go to the website to read the statement, it says it's a 9-minute read, and we printed it out, and it's, I don't know, 17 pages.
A lot of the pages are signatures.
And then 3, it's like maybe a 5-page statement.
Yeah.
It is not something that is very theologically dense.
I think it's meant to provide a kind of easily accessible, hateful platform that is easily digestible, that can be disseminated in mosque spaces. We should also say this is signed by a number of imams, thought leaders, but also by professors.
Including one of the imams in the Raleigh Masjid, which
IAR,
is close to where we are.
Our local kind of largest mosque in our area.
And I think just to kind of summarize this, the way I kind of read it is that this is like a Muslim don't ask, don't tell policy, essentially. They're trying to put forth like there are a lot more gay and trans people lately, and people are talking about it, so we have to weigh in on it.
Right.
And this is what the Islamic perspective is. So that's kind of like is that a fair summary of?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a couple of big picture things, and we'll get into more detail obviously as we go line by line. But I think that one, for those who don't know, before President Bush was elected, before the Iraq War, the slight majority of Muslims were actually Republican voters, which makes sense because particularly, not to call out particular demographics, but it's true, mostly Arab and South Asian Muslims statistically who were older voted Republican, and Black Muslims statistically mostly voted Democrat, as far as we can collect these numbers. And after the Iraq War, when Muslims felt the kind of sting of discrimination at a more frenzied pace, there was a huge shift Democrat. And I think this is what happens when Islamophobia lets out. It's a weird thing to say, but we have these ideas of coalition that I think are beautiful ideals that we should try to aspire to. But the reality is that people have different interests. And now that I think that some of the post 9/11 fervor has died down somewhat, not to say that we live in a perfect, post Islamophobic world, I think that some of these people feel comfortable kind of trending back rightward, and saying actually we don't have to get on this coalition case of the We Believe poster that includes all of these people. We have different values. I think the other thing that's happening that they don't really identify that much here, but the kind of subtext is that there are more queer Muslims. So in a way, this is kind of a victory. I think that they feel a need to kind of make this platform. I think that there's a real threat because, like people of all identities, there's more openness around talking about queerness in Islam, and I think that scares a lot of these leaders.
Definitely. Maybe we should just go into it. I definitely agree. I think these people who are, they are leaders. I'm not going to say like self-appointed leaders. They are leaders appointed by the community, but a lot of them, I'm guessing, are like fairly old men, and
vast majority for sure. There are some women, but not a lot.
I think what we'll see here is that this kind of boils down to like a fight over the like physical spaces that we have for Muslims in the US, and they have historically been led by a lot of like pretty conservative men who hold like powerful positions in the communities that they're in, and they just don't know how to think about changing views and discourse on these issues. And we need to kind of sit and think like, are these the people who we want to continue leading our communities? If they're going to be this blind to like a, significant portion of Muslims in the US and abroad. You're completely right. It's physical spaces. I think it is also digital spaces. Like, so Omar Suleiman, in addition to a few other folks, runs the Yaqeen Institute, which I'm not going to like, even though I find this to be a really hateful statement, the Yaqeen Institute does some good work. Like when I was a kid, at least, and I would Google questions about Islam, I would end up on this website called like whatisislam.org. That was a really shitty website with really like badly coded or whatever makes a website happen.
And Yaqeen Institute has all these like infographics, and it's very accessible. It's really kind of modern looking. It's very social media friendly.
Yeah.
But the danger of things like Yaqeen Institute is it kind of just gives you like the answer. It basically is a more sophisticated what is Islam? Like what is the Islamic perspective on X? And there's no nuance. There's no kind of explanation of the kind of thought that went into coming to those conclusions. And it really kind of flattens our tradition, I think, and flattens the depth of the tradition. It's very much like a Sunni conservative perspective, not just a Sunni perspective, but like a by the American political understanding of conservative perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Shall we dive in?
Yeah. So it starts off, I'll just read the first sentence. Public discourse on sexuality over the past few decades has presented challenges to faith communities. Today, Islamic sexual and gender ethics are at odds with certain recently popular societal views, causing tension for Muslims between their religious beliefs and societal expectations. I have a couple thoughts off the bat.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
The first sentence is trying to posit as though to be a Muslim and to be queer are inherently mutually exclusive.
Uh-huh.
And that's just not the case. It's never been the case.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but ideas of sexuality and gender have historically changed with time. But there has always been both what we now understand to be sexuality and gender, diversity in those categories historically. And there certainly are plenty of Muslims who are queer today. That's just like a fact.
Yeah.
And that's not an American specific phenomenon, though, you know, if you are going to be a queer Muslim, the US is not the worst place to be. There's definitely places in the world where that's a lot more dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I don't want to drag her into this, but whenever anyone says sexual ethics, the person who wrote the literal book on sexual ethics in Islam is Keisha Ali. She's a really amazing professor of Islamic law and jurisprudence at Boston University, who I've had the pleasure of taking 2 classes with. I'm not saying that she's the only exclusive person on that, but I think that she's one of the first people in English and recent scholarship to kind of use that term to talk about fiqh as a kind of ethical system. And so all these men just kind of using her terminology and not citing her and not even if they don't agree with her, not engaging with her work is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. I also have here when they say today Islamic sexual and gender ethics are at odds with certain recently popular societal views. Maybe this isn't literally what they're doing, or they're saying that this is an entirely new thing. But I think that sentence kind of serves to maybe even give the impression that people are becoming trans because now it's recently popular. Right. As opposed to, oh, hey, we have language and perceptions that are shifting on this for the better. They're allowing more and more people to be open and express themselves. And they're kind of, it's not a chicken and egg situation. They're just kind of saying like, oh, well, now our children are becoming almost implying that our children are becoming trans because of all this, and we have to come out with this statement,
right,
so that we can stop it from happening.
Right. And this is the complicated thing that's hard to handle with nuance in public discourse, but the idea of sexuality being a main defining factor in terms of how one self-identifies is a relatively contemporary phenomenon. That has not historically always been the case. So there's a lot of really great literature in ancient Greek and ancient Roman societies. A man who penetrated was kind of seen as a more like the man with authority, and like young boys, which obviously by the standards of today we would call pedophilia, rightfully so, were kind of feminized and seen as like the receptacles of, you know, someone who was penetrating. So it was more about like whether you were penetrated or you penetrated. And we don't have to get into the level of detail, but basically to say like the way that we have thought about gender and sexuality has changed with time. And that matters because this kind of positing back as if the tradition has always been static doesn't really acknowledge for the way that these terms are shifting with time either. You know, like there weren't necessarily people who would have identified as queer in the Prophet's time, but there were people who didn't identify as either male or female, for example. So we have like records of one of the Prophet's wives, Hafsa, had a friend who was like what today we might call trans. Like that wasn't language that existed then, probably. I don't know what the Arabic term would have been. And I'm not saying that it's a one for one, and the way, you know, there's some speculation that the person may have been born intersex, and so it's not that like your biology is the same thing as your sexuality. These are different things in our kind of parlance today. But these terms change with time, right? And so there's this kind of confusion of being like, well, Islam has always said X, when we actually understand sexuality and gender in really different ways today. And some of the kind of traditional fiqh or Islamic legal jurisprudence that they are drawing on that sort of says like sex is between a man and a woman, or marriage is between a man and a woman. And this, I hate to like air our dirty laundry, but historically also said that it was okay to have sex with people who were enslaved. You know, and that's obviously not something that we think is okay today. I don't think anyone who signed this letter, I hope, would defend slavery as a practice. And even in the West, a lot of kind of understandings of marriage are kind of built off of historically understanding women as property, right? So it's a bit of a rant, but you kind of get what I'm saying. These aren't stable categories, and nuance is required.
Yeah, for sure. And also the, you know, the idea that these categories are fairly recent constructions, the way that we think about them.
Right.
I think if...
I kind of like what you said. That doesn't make them less valid, though, right? That doesn't mean that people are becoming trans for that reason. Like, people still deserve to identify, and, you know. Yeah,
for sure. I think there's also kind of a, you know, later on in the letter, they say that, you know, Islam is supposed to be this, you know, immutable thing, and what it states, right? Like, it shouldn't be subject to trends in society or whatever recent ideologies. And well, what are you doing here, right? Like,
right.
You're taking these pretty recent formulations and saying, oh, Islam actually agrees exactly with these things that we have a more contemporary understanding of. Yeah. Which seems to be in conflict, but...
so you're kind of saying like they themselves are also engaging with these recent categories. Yeah.
Well, also, and saying that Islam, which is supposed to be this immutable thing, and you know, these ideals are supposed to be immutable,
right,
somehow fit this recent
paradigm,
right?
Yeah,
this recent paradigm.
And we allow for like progression in other categories of fiqh, like so they're
can you explain, just maybe some people don't know what fiqh is?
Right. So there's two terms that you might have heard, sharia and fiqh. And so sharia comes from the Arabic root, which means like a path or a street, a way. And there's a hadith that a jurist who tries really hard to come to the right conclusion with sincere intention in their heart, if they come to the wrong conclusion, they get one reward, and if they come to the right conclusion, they get two. So in other words, sharia is an idealized blueprint that exists in heaven that God has for every action. Like, there is a right way to do things. But here on earth, we can only get as close to that as we possibly can. And that's what fiqh is. So fiqh is the reality of the jurisprudence that we come up with, whereas sharia is the idealized system that, you know, we do our best to get to, but we might not perfectly get correct because of our like limited, you know, human rationality. And
it's a given that we cannot directly see or know sharia.
Right. And we do our best. And like, you know, so there's a saying that people will write at the end of fatwas or Islamic legal ruling. It's called Allahu Alam, like God knows best. Sometimes the jurists, you can tell they're just doing it out of convention and they're pretty sure they know what's up. But that's the convention, is that you say like, this is what I think, I've studied the sources, I've come to this conclusion, but God knows best. And fiqh is largely drawn from, there's a number of different kind of techniques and tools that people use, but in terms of textual matter, Quran, and then also hadith, so sayings and actions attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. And the Quran, for Muslims, is understood for most Muslims to be the direct word of God. But there is a lot of fiqh that, you know, was developed in the medieval ages about, for example, how to collect zakat or how to collect, you know, mandatory taxes to make sure that the poor, you know, are taken care of. And a lot of that was based on like, you know, if your caravan was raided, or like if you had like this number of camels, and people have done the necessary work to make that make sense in a contemporary context. Like what of this could be fixed assets, for example? What of this could be like more liquid property? You know, how do we deal with the issue of interest in a contemporary context? So we allow for analogy, and we allow for kind of change in thought that is trying to be true to the principles of the Quran and other aspects of jurisprudence. And I'm not sure why that should be different for like sexuality.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be heated. Just one sentence.
Right, let's go to the next sentence.
Do you want to skip down to this ridiculous one? The children.
The more troubling. Yeah. Okay, so it says, well, actually, I want to go to the sentence.
Go for it.
At the same time, public disapproval of LGBTQ practices, beliefs, and advocacy is increasingly met with charges of intolerance and unwarranted accusations of bigotry. And I'm like, okay, public disapproval, right? So they're saying, or at least implying, that there are some Muslims who publicly disapprove of LGBTQ practices and beliefs. I don't know what it means. I mean, I can guess, right? But what exactly do they have in their heads when they mean public disapproval?
Right.
And what the fuck else do you want to happen?
Right.
When you publicly disapprove of
a group of
a
people.
person,
Yeah.
or a group of people.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I want to be intolerant to this person. It's just like the fucking, I mean, do you remember that cake lady? I forget where she was.
Yeah. I forget
her
too.
Her name was it Karen?
I'm so impressed you remember. I don't know her name. But she wanted to not be able to bake cakes for gay people, right?
Yeah. And
people were offended by that.
She's like, people shouldn't, I should have a right to discriminate. And you're just like,
people have a right to then not go to your business. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you want to discriminate. You just don't want any of the consequences associated with it. Or any of the labels of bigotry or, intolerance. Yeah. Okay. So the sentence you were mentioning, more troubling still, there is an increasing push to promote LGBTQ centric values among children through legislation and regulations. And here I just want to ask, like, where is that happening? Yeah. Where is there legislation being promoted or regulations being made to promote being gay among children? Like, what are they talking about?
I don't know.
There is legislation to the opposite. Right. For sure.
Yeah, you're right. It seems like a boogeyman. Like, I don't know what exactly they're referencing.
I have no idea.
Maybe like access to trans affirming healthcare, but even that, I think people kind of make a straw man out of. I don't think it's as common as folks think for people who are prepubescent to access hormone blockers, for example. And I think statistics show that for
it's not that common.
A lot of people, like, affirming care at least is really life-saving and decreases suicide for trans youth.
Yeah. It's not that common though.
Yeah.
It's
in terms of like the actual hormone blockers before puberty, I don't think that's common. Yeah.
The actual numbers, right? Like there was a clip, maybe I'll drop it in here, right? But there was it's just some conservative asshole guy, and I can't remember his name, but he was on the Joe Rogan podcast. And he was, one of his big things that he talks about is he's like, oh, kids are just becoming trans and they're easily getting these hormone blockers or whatever. And, to Joe Rogan's credit, like on the spot, he's like fact checking this guy. And this guy, he's like, okay, so Rogan asked him, he's like, so how many kids would you say are, doing these hormone blockers or whatever? And he's like, oh, it got to be in the millions. And Joe Rogan's like, really? 1 million children? Okay, let's look that up.
I thought I would have heard about that.
And then the guy, like, realizing that he's being fact checked, immediately he's just like, maybe like 250,000 or something like that. And it ended up being 4,000,
which is like nothing. Yeah.
Anyway, so maybe I'll drop that clip in here because it is actually a funny one, but I feel like they're doing the same thing here. Absolutely. Where they're like making it seem like because this is popular, now kids are just doing it.
Yeah.
How many people have had this done?
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but if we're talking about the drugs, millions.
You're talking about hormone blockers.
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers, really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess. I actually think that this shouldn't be happening to.
It's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
This says it's kind of undercounted, but
that would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess, hundreds of thousands at this, but I could be wrong.
I guess their fear that they're trying to drum up is that your kid's just going to go with the trend or what's popular, which is to be gay or trans.
Right. And the second clause of that same sentence says, disregarding parental consent and denying both parents and children the opportunity to express conscientious objection. Again, sounds like the kids are getting drafted into like the gay wars while they're in class, which I don't think is happening. I mean, look, there have been cases that I really fear. I hope this does not happen in the US, but I know there have been like Muslims in the UK who have objected to their kids learning about, I think just learning about like queer people or like that being used as an example of a family, for example, in the classroom. Yeah. And so maybe the subtext here is like, we don't want our children learning about queer people.
Probably.
Yeah. But there's a fucking internet, man. Like, they're gonna learn that there are people that look different than their family.
Yeah.
And that's not the same thing as saying you have to be queer. It's just, you know, part of educating children is like, hey, there's difference in the world. And like, I mean, it was really sad, a teacher that was fired in our area, actually in North Carolina. This was maybe about 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I should have looked this up, but she was using like cards to show different families. And there was like a dad, and I guess one of the dads was had transitioned, and so the dad was pregnant, and like there was huge parental outrage. I think this was in Wake Forest.
Yeah.
And the principal was a coward and like folded pretty fast. But again, that's not saying, hey, you need to do this, or you need to live your life this way, you have to identify this way.
Yeah.
And I think what's more realistic is that more people, I mean, including myself, came of age at a time where we were lucky to like know that there was diversity in you know, sexuality, and so we allowed ourselves to explore those things. I mean, that might be true. I think if you've grown up in a different era, you might not, especially if you are someone who mostly, you know, can have heterosexual attraction, like you might not feel the need to explore other forms of attraction. But that doesn't mean that those impulses aren't innate or they haven't existed before. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's just kind of, this whole first paragraph just kind of reeks of, like the fear-mongering tactics. It's just like a bunch of like parents who don't know how to talk to their children, a bunch of old like imams who's like, help, these kids are all queer, they're doing gender at us.
I mean, and that is the scary thing though, is I'm afraid that the statement will be like used in Islamic schools, and will be used in mosques, and it will,
and
you know, and homes.
I saw, I went through the comments just kind of on
I didn't look at that,
on Omar Suleiman's post on Instagram, which the comments have now been limited or locked. But it was a lot of people who were like, hey, this is wildly, you know, offensive to me. And like, I'm a queer Muslim, and like a lot of people speaking up. But then under that, just like a ton of people being like, thank you so much. Like now I like know how to talk to my children, blah, blah, blah. And it's,
man.
So it is kind of clearly like, I can imagine someone printing this out for like a, you know, their child who's maybe...
doing gender,
who's doing a kid, their child who's doing gender, and it's like, hey, you know, I've got this paper here, look at all these signatories, and you're just kind of serving them these papers and just saying, you know, stop doing gender, stop being gay, stop. For
some reason I find that really funny, the doing gender, because that is kind of like, I don't know why, that kind of captures the silliness of this. Wait, I have to go to the bathroom really fast, sorry.
Okay.
How can I be homophobic? My bitch is gay. Hitman in a top try, see a man topless, even a stick is gay. Hugging my brothers and say that I love them, but I don't swing that way. The man them celebrate Eid, the trap still running on Christmas Day. Somebody told Doja Cat that I'm trying to indulge in that. In my great tracksuit, see the bulge in
How
that.
was the bathroom?
It was good.
Nice. Okay.
All right, the next line says, or the next paragraph just moves along a little bit. We are Muslim scholars and preachers representing a diverse range of theological schools.
Nice.
I wouldn't say that's the case. I didn't check too closely, but I think these seem like they're all Sunni. Not that like matters. There are plenty of Shias who are like anti-gay, but it doesn't even seem like that diverse of a conglomeration on first glance. I might be missing some, but I think that these are, if I had to guess, I mean, Zaytuna, Al-Maghrib, I think this is like 95% Sunni at least. Fiqh Council of North America. Also mostly men, so I would say again, not a super diverse group.
Right.
Yeah.
Below is our collective, nonpartisan articulation of Islam's position on sexual and gender ethics. And again, one, like you said, they're presenting themselves as this, like they've polled every little corner of the Muslim world, and they've had, you know, debates and presented several sides to it, but that's just not the case, right? Like here there is no, and fine, right? Okay, if you want to put out a statement where you all agree and say that it's wrong to be gay or whatever, or, you know, be hush hush about it, whatever. But here they are saying that they're presenting themselves as having really thought this issue through with no preconceived ideological intent and articulation of Islam's position, right? So it's not their position,
right? That's really key.
It's Islam's position.
There are exceptions because Islam is really theologically diverse, as all traditions are, But the majority of Muslims don't have like a clergy. It's not like the Catholic Church where there is like a hierarchical structure, which is issuing commands. And so it's kind of strange to like speak for Islam, honestly, in this kind of authoritative way, as if they were like elected or anointed uniquely by God to like issue edicts. I mean, even like, I don't think people understand like fatwas or Islamic legal opinions. Like there are conflicting opinions. Like that is actually what is more common.
There
you know
are,
what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I remember, with the jurisprudence, there are different madhabs.
Right. Different schools of thought. Yeah.
And, like I remember I was watching one of Intisar Arab's lectures on just doubt in Islamic
Professor
law.
at Harvard. Yeah.
Yeah. Professor of Islamic law, or just professor. And I think she focuses on Islamic law. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Way to
she
say
definitely
that
does.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there could be an issue, I think there was an example she gave of a woman in Egypt who was, divorcing her husband, and there was some issue about what she, got to keep and what she didn't. And she went to Qadi from like one of the madhabs, I forget which one. And he was like, hey, this is what my school of thought and my training, this is the outcome of that decision. I don't think this is a good outcome for you. And I think you should actually go to a different judge.
Oh, interesting. Like he himself recommended that.
Yeah, he was like, you should go to a different judge and get a different ruling because
from a different school
my
of thought.
school says this.
Yeah.
And so there's even recognition that, one, there's always going to be doubt in certain situations. And that, again, like you said, we are imperfect beings trying to interpret an ideal or perfect law that we cannot directly see. But two, there's different ways to interpret different things, and an understanding that just because one person or one school thinks one way, and understanding that there are very real material considerations in people's lives, and you have to balance that with what is a good outcome from people in this situation.
Absolutely.
Versus another, right? And again, here you're telling me it's a diverse, reasoned and thought out position that they're taking, but I'm just not seeing that. There's not any engagement with any sort of nuance or how this affects people or how it's going to be used.
Or like you're gesturing towards like explaining diversity in the tradition. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. At the end of this paragraph, I have not really much else. They just want to affirm their right to express their beliefs while simultaneously recognizing our constitutional obligation to exist peacefully with those whose beliefs differ from ours. Again, it's not about beliefs. It's about who these people are. Like, these are people. These are not... later on, they actually also refer to the LGBTQ block. They say...
like they're a voting block.
Well, no. They say, I'm just going to read from a couple pages ahead, but we can come back to this. We recognize that the same religious groups have reinterpreted or revised religious doctrine to be inclusive of LGBTQ ideology. Again, and this one that we're on, they're saying we have a constitutional obligation to exist peacefully with those whose beliefs differ from ours. And it's not an ideology. We're not talking about a different ideology. We're not talking about people who have different beliefs. We're talking about a group of actual human beings who are different from you,
right?
Who are also Muslim,
right? In many cases, yeah.
In many cases, right? I'm assuming maybe this is talking about specifically like
definitely
queer Muslims.
That part, yeah.
But it just doesn't make any sense to me that they're framing it as an ideology, like a thing that people can just think,
right?
And not think, right? Like if you have a better argument, if you point exactly to where in the Quran it says to not be gay, then suddenly
people
their
won't
beliefs
be gay.
should change, right?
Right.
But this is a thing that you have to actually engage with in some sort of like nuance. If they had gone through and like really, really engaged with some text and scripture and like, hadith and, like a lot of like the history of Islamic philosophy and whatever. And we're like, yeah, we're just like very troubled and we don't know how to make sense of this. And this is not something that we personally feel we agree with. That's one thing. But to say like you're your beliefs are just bad and you should change them. Like, I don't know. It just feels like an entirely different.
I appreciate the distinction between like belief and also like a person's right to exist as they feel is natural to them. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also this, begs the question of like, oh, we have to recognize the constitutional obligation to exist peacefully. Okay, what if it weren't for the U.S. Constitution? Then what would you do, and what is your prescription?
Also, I just feel like there's something kind of funny about being like, hey, state, protect us, and being bigoted. Like, fuck you. Like, I don't know. Like, okay, big, brave, bad Muslim leaders. Yeah. Like, I don't know. All right, I'm going to, do you have anything for the source of morality for Muslims? Because I was going to skip down to Islam's position on sexuality and gender.
Just that this is the section that I was talking about earlier in that second paragraph where they're talking about Islam enjoys a rich tradition of jurisprudence that allows for diverse perspectives and accommodates various cultural norms.
But then doesn't go into any of those details.
Not at all. And then it mentions later on that, let's see, particular principles are explicitly stated in Revelation, known to be necessary elements of Islam, and unanimously agreed upon by qualified scholars, are deemed immutable and not open to revision by any person or entity. And this is, what I was mentioning earlier, is that you're saying these are immutable characteristics of the religion, but you're using relatively contemporary categories to justify them.
Right. The first sentence of the Islam's position on sexuality and gender subsection says that by a decree from God, sexual relations are permitted within the bounds of marriage, and marriage can only occur between a man and a woman. Again, that's not accurate traditional fiqh. If we're talking about fiqh that came in during the medieval era, at least, there were unfortunately was a lot of legislation or a lot of legal jurisprudence around having sex with one's concubines, some of whom did not have full, as we would understand it now, full citizenship. And then there are a couple of Quranic citations. This first one from Al-Nisa, I didn't see anything specific about homosexuality.
About adultery.
Yeah, it's about adultery. Mm-hmm. And then from Al-Araf and Al-Naml, there's the story of Lot, which is used, not just by Muslims, but also in a lot of biblical circles. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of like the main, I think, understanding, chronically at least, that people use to justify anti-queer bias in terms of the story. There have been more contemporary tafsir or exegesis of those verses to interpret it as being more about the rape than about the homosexual nature of those interchanges. But I will admit that's a relatively recent interpretation. So take that as you will.
Yeah. And if they had wanted to specifically engage with the surah that they have here, Al-Araf and Al-Naml, that to me would have been...
Arabic is so beautiful, mashallah.
That to me would have been more worthwhile than anything else in this statement. Because that is something that, I don't, I'm not going to do like an exegesis of it or whatever on here. I don't think we have time, but they could have at least,
I would argue.
They could have at least like dove into that, because, there is language that if one were to kind of read it surface level, would seem to imply that there is some sort of like conflict here or whatever, right? Like people do use it to justify all the time.
Right.
And there is a lot of discourse about it that is very confusing.
Right. And they could have included things from both perspectives. Like Amina Wadud has done some beautiful tafsir work on this that sort of talks about more the larger principle of consent.
Yeah. But none of the other surahs or any of the other citations that they have throughout here actually
are about this. No, it's really just those two. You're right.
Yeah, the other one is Al-Nisa 119, and it's about slitting the ears of cattle and like not doing idolatry.
I didn't even see that.
It's like further on in this section.
Yeah, and they have Al-Azab also is more just about believing and not about, The other thing that they're kind of missing, I think that's interesting, is like, why is this the greatest sin? I mean, this really kind of feels a little bit like, hey, we want a seat at the culture wars. Like we want to align ourselves with the far right discourse in the US.
Maybe they think Trump is going to win again.
We want to align ourselves with the DeSantis of the world, because like traditional, again, and I'm saying traditional in air quotes because what is traditional, but like the majority of fiqh, as far as I'm aware, kind of point to this sort of category of crimes called the hudud crimes, and they're crimes that are kind of like the worst crimes. And they have really high metrics typically to be proven. And one of them is zina, which is extramarital sex.
Right.
And you could have really written this. I don't personally feel strongly about this issue.
Extramarital or premarital?
Sex before marriage and outside of the confines of marriage.
Oh.
So, cheating on your spouse or having sex before you're done your nikah.
Yeah.
And that's like a really serious moral issue for a lot of legal jurists.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that like,
I'm in court. I'm like, Your Honor, what is sex?
well, no, there were huge debates about this. Like, what if like there are tongues involved? Like, what if the penis doesn't fully insert? Like, people actually like sat around and thought about this shit, probably because people had questions,
Yeah.
There's a little bit of like the Mormon docking thing. Like, if you just put it in there and you don't move it, like, does that count?
It accidentally.
It didn't move, and it is a very like, penis and vagina understanding of sex.
Right.
But like, it's just interesting because like a lot of Muslims are having premarital sex regardless of their gender and sexuality.
It doesn't say no busting.
Right. But like, why is that? Like, it just kind of, it does show that I think that they're so influenced by these culture wars. Like, why is that not like the issue on the table? Because honestly,
actually, I was thinking the same thing while I was reading this. I was like, honestly, like some of these things, like some of the surahs that they have are about like the pre and extramarital sex. And I'm like, that's probably more relevant to
absolutely to the majority of Muslim youth. Like, statistics show, as much as we can know, that like there is a lot of premarital sex happening in Muslim communities, and I don't have a personal stance on that for this podcast. I think temporary marriage is an interesting thing that should be explored, but I think that it just kind of shows like the fact that someone could maybe wear a pride shirt or identify as gay. Like, I don't think that legal jurists would have been as threatened by that in the medieval era as like someone having sex outside of marriage or not with their slave. Like, Yeah. And by the way, like the typical punishment, for example, for like cheating on a spouse, it requires to have 4 witnesses, which really means that you have to be like fucking in public. Like, you have to like there were really high, I don't know, what's the right way to say this? Like thresholds, I guess, for proving these kind of crimes also.
Burdens of proof. Yep.
Yeah. The next page has this kind of appeal to ijma, or religious consensus. Super interesting. I know a lot of folks think that this doesn't really exist, that there is no full either scholarly consensus or religious consensus on almost anything, but it is something that people will kind of appeal to as a tool. We also have, after the al-Nisa quotation that you were referring to with verse 119, that as a rule, Islam strictly prohibits medical procedures intended to change the sex of healthy individuals. That actually is not uniformly the case. And regardless of whether such procedures are termed gender, and they have, in quotations, affirming or confirming. Right. Yeah. So you're saying that that's not a... I mean, I don't think that they're going about it in a way that is right either, but it is interesting to know, like in Iran, for example, there is like a state subsidizing of medical procedures for trans folks. Yeah. Interestingly, in Iran, it's kind of like a reverse situation of the US, where I feel like there are people who are now comfortable with people being gay and being lesbian, but like some of those people still can't wrap their heads around people being trans. My understanding is that in Iran, there is more of an acceptance of people who transition but kind of maintain the gender binary, but very little acceptance of people who are non-binary or of gay or lesbian people. So there's actually some pressure to transition. So I don't think that's great either. It's just like a very different, also bad paradigm, but it's an example of an Islamic state that, says that they are ruling on the basis of Islamic law, that actually condones, transitioning. Yeah. I have a note here, and maybe this isn't the right note to make, but when we're, again, talking about, they could have talked about zina. Right. They could have talked about a lot of things. Yeah. What does Islam say about FGM, right? Like, why couldn't they have used this ruling about like, oh, it's wrong to mutilate or whatever, any creation of God, or it's wrong to, change sex or have any sort of surgery like that. Why did you focus on this and not something that is really actually happening in a lot of the Muslim world? In some of the Muslim world. Yeah. It's very common in North Africa, unfortunately. Yeah. But, it's, and I'm not saying this FGM is an Islamic practice. Yeah. It's not. But there are Muslims who practice it, for sure.
There are Muslims who practice it. And when you were talking about prioritizing things to weigh in on.
Absolutely.
Why isn't that higher on your radar than it is? I mean, maybe in an American Muslim context, it's not that important.
There's one community I know, like one small Shia community that has an issue with in the U.S. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but you're right. Like, why this is a priority when we're talking about like bodily change.
Right.
Yeah. Islam distinguishes between feelings, action, identity. The sinful actions of an individual do not and should not dictate his or her identity. So basically, you shouldn't take pride in sin. You know, the implication here being that to be queer is sinful, and particularly to act on that desire is sinful. Mm-hmm. And this is what you were saying, the don't ask, don't tell, the last sentence of this paragraph. Islam prohibits prying into others' private lives and discourages public disclosure of sexual behavior. They're basically saying, hey, if you have these feelings, if you have these kind of forms of attraction or different ways that you identify, like shove it in the closet. Like, don't tell anyone. That's definitely the prescription here.
Yeah. That's the only prescription I can read out of it. Again, you ask yourself, there must be a purpose for why they went to great lengths to write this statement and then to get hundreds of people to sign it. In the statement itself, it does not make a clear prescription for what they want. It leaves it to the reader to interpret or to divine what what to do after reading this, right? Yeah. It's not saying here's our religious ruling or whatever, and this is exactly what we think should happen. Because the only conclusion that you can come to after reading this, again, is we should do takfir on all queer Muslims, mm-hmm. right? And just say you're not Muslim, mm-hmm. and expel them from the community. They're not going to say that, but someone might read that into this.
Right.
Or you can say, we can't tell you to not be queer or trans or whatever, but don't express yourself.
Right. Keep it to yourself.
Keep it to yourself. And that's kind of how a lot of communities, unfortunately, have operated mm-hmm. for a long time. And
it is so much pain. It's so sad.
It's so much pain. And it is kind of like a form of violence,
right.
Just brought on by this hegemonic religious conservative leadership.
Yeah.
People experience severe depression and they kill themselves, or they leave the community, and
that's the other thing, right? They feel hey, it's not comfortable for me to be in this community, and then they lose contact with family or with loved ones and support.
And then you get people it's I'm sure Ayan Hirsi Ali has had a lot of bad experiences, right. And I'm not invalidating that, but that's how you get mouthpieces who then go on conservative media in the US and they're used by an even larger force to demonize
all Muslims.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right?
And then this last paragraph is kind of what you were gesturing towards earlier about hey, there have been people who have been trying to say that you can be queer and Muslim, but that's not the case, Yeah.
That's
revisionist. That's not authentic.
Yep. Again, referring to it as an ideology, which I think is a very lazy way to get around the fact that you actually have to contend with people in your community and
definitely
come to, if you're writing this for the sake of their argument or whatever, it simplifies it and makes it seem we're just pushing back against a Western ideology,
a woke ideology. Yeah.
Right. And I think specifically also a East-West divide, right?
Right.
A woke Western ideology.
Right.
There are gay people across the Muslim world, and trans people across
Absolutely.
the Muslim world, and queer people.
And there are specific cultural contexts in which people understand that better when you don't use those terms, which is kind of complicated. So for example, the Hijra community in South Asia does face law of discrimination today, but has existed historically since the time of the Mughals. And some of them now, as they've affiliated with NGOs, have started to describe themselves as trans.
Yeah.
But they're a community of people that, as far as I understand, and I apologize if my language is not perfect, would describe themselves as being born biologically male, but come to identify as socially female. Mm-hmm. And that's a community that's existed for a really long time that has, in certain parts of history, had quite a measure of acceptance that played a role in royal courts. I've even read contemporary ethnographies of communities in Iraq, which, are seemingly quite conservative, but there's an understanding that it's okay for women to take their hijab off to get their hair cut by men because those men are not interested in women. Mm-hmm. There's a kind of way in which there's tons of diversity in these categories globally. We might just use different terms for them, Yeah. Yeah. This is the dumbest section, in my opinion.
The constitutional right to hold our views is the title of this section.
Yeah. We also acknowledge their constitutional right to live in peace and free from abuse. That's very nice. Thank you. Nevertheless, we emphasize our God-given and constitutional right to hold, live by, and promote our religious beliefs in the best manner. They don't give any context, but quote, put a Quranic citation in there, without fear of legal reprisal or systematic marginalization. And I just feel like this is such a I don't know, from the rights playbook, victim mentality. Who is marginalizing you? This country is not that queer friendly. You're what state are you living in?
The communities that you're in.
Right. I don't know. In a lot of this country, I just don't think that, maybe you should be marginalized, I don't see that really happening. I just who are is there a Muslim trying to not make cakes? What is I don't know what they're referring to here.
Yeah, I think it's they want to be able to say this stuff and
without social reprisal.
And they want people to agree with them. They say peaceful coexistence does not necessitate agreement, but it really feels and reeks of them saying, I want to say what I want to say, and not only do I want people to not tell me I'm a bad person, but I want them to agree that I'm right.
But there is this aspect of the next paragraph. We call on policymakers to protect our constitutional right to practice our religious beliefs freely without fear or harassment. Who is harassing you?
Exactly.
Who is coming into the mosque to be honestly, again, I kind of wish they would, but what agent of the state is coming to the mosque to be actually don't tell this kid to not talk about being gay? That's not a real thing that's happening that I'm at all aware of.
Yeah, no, it's just it's in the it's in the ether, it's in the vibes of the.
That doesn't mean that your constitutional rights to exist are being threatened. I just don't understand.
Yeah, I love the idea that again, they're talking about something that is apparent in our religion. To them it is apparent, and it's in the Quran. But here they are supplementing with the United States Constitution.
right.
But also, okay, so on that sentence that you just read, we call on policymakers to protect our constitutional right to practice our religious beliefs freely. One, there's already a provision for that in the Constitution.
Yeah, it exists.
It's the First Amendment. Right. Two, what other policy do you want? Right?
Yeah.
If you went and asked any of these signatories, okay, let's do it. Let's tell me your policy.
How to help me protect you.
Help me protect you. What do you want us to do?
Right.
What would they tell you? You'd probably have the ones who are maybe closer to a liberal sensibility just be they probably
don't make me feel bad.
Don't make me feel bad.
Don't call me bigoted.
Again, they would probably maybe come up with something similar to a don't ask, don't tell. And I think maybe some of the more conservative ones would range to well, let's see. I think you should ban gay people from the mosque.
Ugh, that's awful, but you're right. I do think that's the kind of direction this is going in.
Yeah.
Or I don't want people who say that they are trans and Muslim to be able to say that they're Muslim.
Yeah.
That offends my sensibilities or something.
Yeah.
Which what babies? Talk about needing a safe space. Why does that threaten your connection with God? Then just get married to who you think it's proper to get married to. It's just silly.
Yeah.
They're
trying to make it seem they're telling me I have to be gay.
Right.
And I don't want to be.
I don't want to do that. Okay, don't do that. Who cares? No one asked you.
Yeah. Then there's the last section is a call to action to the Muslim community.
To be clear, we cannot overstate the detrimental spiritual consequences for those who intentionally reject, advocate the rejection of, or misrepresent the will of God, as in doing so they endanger their status as believers. Again, all of the shit that the Muslim community in the U.S. could have rallied around, domestic violence, which is not uniquely a Muslim American problem, but exists in Muslim American communities like it does in all American communities. Racism, police brutality, women who are kind of forced into marriages that don't want to be in marriages, all the things that they could have rallied around. This is the most detrimental.
Yeah. And again, it's just, this is so stupid. Again, that's pretty much the context.
That's our main takeaway.
That's the entirety of the statement. I just think it's really unfortunate that there's no engagement with any opposing viewpoints.
Yeah.
They're cherry picking the things that they feel are clear cut and just saying that, well, this, undeniably agrees with our viewpoint.
Yeah.
Which, fine, whatever, people do in internet arguments all the time, but there are stories in Islam, in the tradition, that, have characters, right? Like fighting against the hegemonic sort of figures of their time,
right,
on the side of justice.
Right.
And even at the time, people tell them like,
yeah,
oh, hey, like Hussein, Ali,
yeah.
I just think it's unfortunate that they don't take the lessons of that and say like, oh, well, there are times of doubt in which someone had to take a massive risk and then fought for what they believed in.
Yeah.
And that's just not given equal weight to like, oh, well, there's, a couple lines in the Quran that talk about
the story of Lot.
Of Lot.
Right. We have like such profound traditions of justice. It's kind of like, why not uplift those? Yeah. Completely.
And I think it's, again, like the purpose of this statement or the effect of the statement is just going to be that young people and some young queer people are going to read this and they're going to not want to be part of
the community,
the Muslim community.
Yeah. And that's like a trend that's changing, which is really, that's why honestly, I do think that ultimately these people are afraid because there are more and more people that are like, actually, like, I don't want to give up either of these identities. Like I'm queer and I'm Muslim. And so that's really hopeful, but it is sad to think that this is going to be used as ammunition against them.
Yeah. Like, just imagine being like, again, when I was reading through the list of signatories, like, what's his name?
Also, Imam Sahib Webb, a lot of people follow him. This is the other thing. We should not be worshiping these dumb men on YouTube. Like, they're just people.
Like, Imam Muhammad Badawi, right? Islamic Association of Raleigh.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I don't know who that is, Jay. It's our local imam.
I was, like, reading that, and I was just like, imagine being, like, a young queer kid, and you see your imam.
Right.
Someone who...
The mosque that your parents go to every Friday.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh, well, what do you do? How are you supposed to feel?
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate that they felt like this was a worthwhile statement and that it's going to help people. It's really going to do a lot of damage.
I totally agree. I've got some tweets, if I can read those, that I thought had really good commentary.
Yeah.
So Mamadou Tal, I think is his name, said, I could appreciate scholarship that looks at the various ways gender has been understood throughout Islamic civilizations. Even if you conclude with a conservative position, at least it's scholarly. Yeah. It reads like an attempt to align Islam with the right in this culture war.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with that. Like, so he just said, I have to say it's an embarrassing read. A cursory glance at the history of Islamic civilizations illustrates countless examples of how gender was constructed and the complexities of how they understood gender nonconforming people. We have fiqh that explicitly deals with intersex people, and medieval scholars who recognize a third gender that was neither male or female. And so again, I thought this was a very kind of like reasonable take.
Yeah.
I mean, I would probably go a little further than this, but I still appreciated this position that like, even if you're going to conclude with the more conservative stance, it's just so not like a good faith scholarly effort to kind of say this is the blanket position.
There's no scholarship in this whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right. I absolutely agree with that. And I think you kind of alluded to this before, right? On like the scholarship and like why, like even if they conclude with the conservative viewpoint, provides something that doesn't seem so, it almost seems like they're trying to ingratiate themselves to like an American right-wing ideology.
Yeah.
And we can kind of just like zoom out and see that I feel like you said, right? Like in a pre 9/11 context, people were very, post 9/11 context, people swung very much to the right for a little bit. I think there are two different ways that
to the left, you mean?
Well, I think there are two different ways that someone could handle something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these big moments in our society where it feels like things are shifting, right? There are the groups of people who will try to ingratiate themselves to like the hegemonic ruling party, mm-hmm. right? So there were a lot of Bush supporters post 9/11 who were just like, I'll vote for you twice. Gay marriage is wrong. Mm-hmm. We're good Muslims, right? Like they're trying to almost assimilate, right? That's the response that they have because they don't want to be victimized, or like there's this like intranational colonization of these people, right? Like they're just kind of like very much internalized that. And then I think there's like another group of people who would say like, oh no, we need to form solidarity across our group and then across others, and we need to push back against things like surveillance and extrajudicial detainments and whatever, right? Those things kind of happened at the same time, and people like swing back and forth or whatever among those groups, but this very much reeks of like the conservative post 9/11 strain of people, right? And you know what's gone on is Trump 2016 still has an effect. He's running again. There's all this stuff happening, and like you said, in Florida, and it just seems like they're very much going in that direction. But there are a lot of Muslims also at the same time right now doing a lot of good solidarity work.
Absolutely.
And I don't think we should discount that, right? Like again, these people do not speak for all of Islam.
Completely.
Like, there are a lot of Muslims who are doing good work, and so I would encourage.
And that's making them nervous. Yeah.
Yeah. But sorry, you have more tweets.
Well, actually, I think you had a good point. Were you going to say you'd encourage people to like look for those people?
I'd encourage people to look for those people, and to like, if you read this statement and you're just like, fuck, dude, you feel kind of pushed away by it. Again, these people are not Islam.
Absolutely.
Right?
And they don't have to be your leaders, you know.
And I think it's incumbent upon young people who are doing good work to really, really be more intentional about creating like physical spaces that are open to everyone.
Absolutely.
And very affirming of all viewpoints, right? Because I don't see that as a threat to Islam. I don't see it as a threat to my personal beliefs, and I don't see it as a threat to
and like how
Islam
sad like there are really cool spaces like Masjid Rabia, for example, in Chicago, which also has a lot of interesting online programming. If you're not in Chicago, that is an explicitly queer affirming mosque. You know, if that threatens your idea of Islam, that people want to be connected and like do online Taraweeh prayers, like, you know, the Ramadan prayers in a place that they feel safe, and they're actively seeking God, then what does that say about you? You know what I mean? Like if you're like, well, it's a problem that they're queer affirming and people are literally like going to a place that they feel safe to like learn Quran and to like recite better, like it just kind of puts in perspective like what these people's priorities are.
It feels more like their priorities are signaling to non-Muslim conservatives that we're like you.
We're one of you. I think you're right. I think it's dual. I think it's that, and also conservating, also signaling to liberal Muslims like, hey, you're not real Muslims. Like you're not going to win this fight. Yeah. This it's similar to what we've said, but I thought that it was well put by Dr. Donna Austin, who is I know as a PhD from Rutgers. I'm not sure where she currently is, like what her current academic institution is, but really cool anthropologist. She goes by Tiny Muslima on Twitter. She wrote, "These folks will not come together to issue statements or lift a finger about climate change, anti-Black racism, universal health care, food insecurity, corporate greed, or even sexual abuse exploitation committed by their peers in the clergy class, but they got smoke for this."
Yeah.
And that's so real. Like there's also like there are unfortunately in all religious communities, I would say, that have, you know, religious authorities, there are issues with abuse that are really real. And like that has not kind of ever garnered this kind of joint statement.
They should have maybe put out a statement against all of the religious and spiritual leaders in the American community who we found have been DMing extra wives. I think that would have been more worthwhile.
Oh my gosh. So Numan Ali Khan is this like Desi like YouTube guy who he's got some okay videos on various
He's kind
things.
of the most prominent example, right?
Yeah, but he has like a lot about like, you know, the sanctity of marriage and whatnot. Yeah. And like he was DMing all these women while he was married, like shirtless pictures and stuff. And he still is on lecture circuits. There is no justice in this dunya. He like came back, he apologized. Like, you know, what woman could ever? Obviously, like there are women who like, that's the other thing that just drives me crazy. Sorry, you can cut this if you want. This is kind of a rant, but like a lot of the people I really look up to, my advisor, Juliana Hammer, Keisha Ali, a lot of these kind of like women, Amina Wadud, really cool women scholars are kind of called like, you know, not Muslim, and they like live pretty, by all outward appearances, like pious lives. Like they're not out here DMing random men. They're not like, you know, they're just like regular members of society, but they get takfir. You know what I mean? Whereas there's these like YouTube scholar hotshots that are like DMing 20-year-olds, and it's like, well, at least they don't believe in queerness. Like, you know, it's just so dumb.
Yeah.
Like, not that this should even count, but some of these women who get so much hate are not even like identified themselves as queer, but it's just like they're still seen as not. It's just silly.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jonathan Brown, Georgetown professor who signed this, he did have one tweet that I thought had some interesting responses. This pretty much sums it up. So he's like responding to a quote tweet. And then he says, post 9/11, organs of a U.S. establishment produced and empowered a cohort of progressive Muslim professors, but this didn't reach mosques, ulama, and preachers, ulama being the scholarly class. And then Ahmed Ali Akbar, who goes on Rad Brown Dads on Twitter as his handle, said, just because it didn't affect people in power, it doesn't mean the ideas didn't affect everyday people. As a journalist, I've seen a concerted shift in young Muslims, and it's extremely disingenuous to suggest there has been no change. Even the polls suggest massive changes. And I think this is right. I think that I think that's why these people are afraid, is because a lot of young Muslims globally and certainly in the US are more progressive. I'm not saying that every young Muslim who's like, yeah, I have gay friends, it doesn't bother me, has read Keisha Ali's Sexual Ethics, but I think that did contribute to a kind of paradigm change and a shift, or at least helped it on a lot of levels. I also think that one thing that isn't really correct about this is there isn't really an ulama class anymore. Like, there aren't really people who realistically go to their local jurist to get like a fatwa. We all just use Google. So I don't think like we're very siloed, you know, like you are likely to find people who can affirm your opinion. But I don't think that the people who sign this document are that different than progressive Muslim professors. You know, I have a little bit of a stake in this debate, I guess. Yeah. But it's just that they have a different take. Yeah. You know, I mean, I also don't think that if you're a professor at any American institution, that makes you a qualified member of the ulama. I certainly wouldn't say that about myself, and I don't think that counts for more conservative professors either. Yeah. I'm not sure if I kind of got a little lost in the weeds there, but that was an interesting conversation. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to end with, though, a few more thoughts that's also great, is that there had been a number of responses, some of which we just read, but there was like a larger response that used the same kind of headline, and it says, reclaiming Islam, affirming our right to interpretation. And it's really lovely. I can just read a couple paragraphs. We reject the idea that there's a singular interpretation where Islam outlaws LGBTQIA plus people or consider queerness or trans identity sinful. We stand by our LGBTQIA plus community members and stress that labels of sinfulness put their health, basic rights, and lives in danger. To quote the Quran, don't let hatred of a people cause you to be unjust. Instead, we claim our God-given right to read the Quran for ourselves, to use our God-given intuition and reason to decide what is right and wrong without the pressures of self-proclaimed religious leaders and clergy members. And it goes on, just kind of, again, like affirming the right of individuals. And also, I thought this is particularly helpful. As more Muslims choose the challenging path and follow their Quranic command to read and learn for themselves, the less need there is for intermediaries like sheikhs, imams, and ustads. We believe in an all-powerful God who has the capacity to enact and protect his own will and does not need the help of human beings who appointed themselves his sole interpreters. As the Quran says, all power and authority belong to God alone. Judgment alone belongs to God. Really long list of signatories here, as long as the other list. One thing that's quite sweet, I think, is a lot of people just signed like their like practicing Muslim, believer, dental student, like a lot of everyday people, which is very sweet. Lawyer, someone signed human. You've also got some professors. I see Amina Wadud added her name there at the end, which is awesome. But yeah, so already there's been a kind of response, which is really nice. Yeah. Not as many professors as I expected to see on this, to be honest. I'll add my name, but a lot of therapists and psychologists on this, which also makes sense. I can imagine that people like that with that profession know how harmful this could be to people they work with. Yeah. I think that's actually, I think if I was looking for a culturally competent therapist, I would probably look at that list. For real, that's a good point. Yeah, see someone who signed this. Them out, look at a recommendation. Yeah. Oh, artist, student, woman, truck driver. These are all like very sweet. Any other thoughts? No, I think we pretty much covered it. Yeah. I just think there's a lot of fuss about it, and maybe in the grand scheme of things, this is like really not all that. I hope so. Yeah, hope it's not or impactful. I don't know. What do you think? I think it's hard to say. I do worry that it will make its way into like mosques and into Islamic schools. Yeah. But the cool thing about the internet is that also young kids have keyboards and they can hopefully find other stuff out there. Yeah.
and not only find other stuff out there, but again, don't let this like conservative strain of like people who just don't want to make room in their lives or hearts for something that they feel is new, even though it's not. Don't let them take over like the spaces that we have. Right? It's time that we have to start seeing a shift in like new, more understanding like religious and spiritual leaders who can grapple with this stuff in a way that feels genuine and honest. And then I think also just beyond that, beyond just like the religious questions, it's important to have spaces where people genuinely like get together and connect.
And that should be, you're so right, that should be like what is kind of guiding our communities, right? Like principles of inclusion and of love and safety. Yeah. May our Islam not look like Florida's legislature. That is not a good blueprint.
There is a place in Florida called Islam Morada.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you told me this.
It's like a mixture of Islam and Florida.
Wow.
So maybe all these guys should just move there and just establish like a mini caliphate.
Yeah. Like conservative Floridian caliphate.
Yeah. Have at it. But that's it. What are any final thoughts?
No.
All right. Well, bye.
Bye.